Hello everybody and welcome to the Kube Vanguard CKA series, studying for the Certified Kubernetes Administrator exam. Okay, I've changed my lighting a bit because I noticed in the last video I had a light right over my desktop, and so when I was watching the video I see these like flashes in my glasses. It's like, really kind of freaking me out. I couldn't concentrate. I was looking at this, so I've moved it higher up, so now there's a bit of a shadow. I am not a video expert, otherwise I'd be in Hollywood. Instead, I am a certified Kubernetes administrator until July, because guess what? 3 years is up in July and I have to redo it. So the point of this series is to go through and try to give some pointers and remind myself of some things that I learned the first time I did it. Now, I feel a lot more confident than the first time that I did it, because obviously it's been 3 years and I've worked a lot with Kubernetes. Nevertheless, it's a difficult exam. It's a time performance-based exam, command line, so never take it for granted. Okay, so why don't we now take a look at what I want to show you? Not this, my OBS. Let's go into here. Important thing to start out talking about is that the Kubernetes Certified Administrator exam allows you to use the documentation. You might think, oh, great, fantastic, this will be easy. No, because it won't help you at all unless you do a couple things. One, you have to learn the material very well beforehand. Two, you have to learn to know where things are in the documentation so that you can get to them quickly. Okay, and what do I mean by that? Well, the type of questions you can get are going to be various questions, and they'll sometimes say, well, create a pod or do something like this, and they won't necessarily give you the YAML file. Now, you don't want to memorize YAML files. First of all, it takes too long. Second of all, incredible waste of time typing them out. So what you normally do, and everyone does this, I think, who passes, is you go to Kubernetes documentation and you find examples, okay, and then you use those. So, for instance, let's say it says create a persistent volume claim, okay, to create storage. What you can do is you go to the search here and then type PVC, okay, shortened form. You don't have to type the whole thing out. And the first thing that comes up is persistent volumes, okay? And I know, because I've read that a lot of times, that persistent volumes and the persistent volume claim examples are on that page, okay? So having gone in there many times and practiced, I will know that. So that's another important thing to point out. You want to go and do as much as possible beforehand, not just practice exams, but also doing little tasks. Kubernetes has the task section here. There's other you can Google Kubernetes tasks and it'll say, okay, build this pod, build something like that, and practice going in and leveraging the Kubernetes documentation to build these things by changing them. Now, when you say copy the YAMLs, Jeff, what, I just copy them, that's it? No, obviously. The questions will be different, and they'll have maybe different angles to them or different, names or something. But what you'll get is the structure of the YAML, so you won't have to retype everything, okay? So if I go into persistent volume claims, persistent volumes, I know that, because I've been to this page a lot of times, that down here somewhere, there is a persistent volume claim YAML file that I can use. Here's persistent volume, but further down is a persistent volume claim. There you go, okay? So I would have practiced this a lot of times. I'd know where it is right away. That took me 2 seconds to find, so that would save me time. Now, what do you do with that afterwards? Okay, so let's say, for instance, again, it's hard to on the fly to think of what kind of question it would be. Let's take my my Kubernetes installation I have. Now, I'm using Rancher Desktop. So this is my Windows laptop with Windows Subsystem for Linux in it, okay, which I think we've had a show on Kubernetes Vanguard showing you how to install those. So that's all installed. So I'll do a K get nodes, and you'll see that I have a small K3S installation here, which I can use for a big part of my studying. Obviously, there's some things like KubeADM where you have to build a cluster. You can't do that on K3S on a Rancher Desktop. We'll get to that. Okay. Another important point, which I'll point out right away, an important point that I'll point out, is when you said, Jeff, you typed K instead of kubectl. Yes, aliases. Now, I think, and when I say think, it means you want to recheck the examination details before you do it, because these things can change. But I think now they've included the aliases in there. Most of the ones, like the aliases and the auto-completion. What do I mean? Well, you want to save time when you're doing this exam. You don't want to be typing kubectl out all the time, because if you're rushing or you're thinking about something else, you can make typos, okay? So what there are these things called aliases, and they are in the bash RC file. This is a little bit extra. You don't need to know this unless you want to do it in your little lab. So in your home directory, your Linux home directory, you'll have bash RC, and if you can do a search for alias, I've already done it, but so /alias, and then there it comes up there. But there you go. You can see here there are some aliases that are in there by default, like LL, LA, which is ls-a. But here are the ones that I've added, and these I believe should be in the exam by default. But I say this again, double check. When I first did the exam, they weren't there, and you had to make sure these were there. So you wasted time typing these things out. But I'll show you a place you can get them in copy and paste. So alias K equals kubectl. That means instead of typing kubectl, I can type K. And then there's auto completion, which is important because you don't want to type kubectl and then have to type all the other stuff, right? You want to be able to save time. So what I mean by that is I can do K get no, press the tab button, and notes comes up. That's the auto completion, okay? In a 2-hour exam, you've got a lot of hands-on things you have to type. That could amount to quite a bit of time saving, so you want to do it, okay? Now, you might see recommendations. Some people go and create a huge amount of aliases. So for instance, let's say you need to troubleshoot a pod. Okay, one of the ways to do it is to describe the pod. So let's see what I've got here. I've got a namespace. Let's go kubectl, K, get ns, use shortened forms wherever you can. So there are things like namespaces, persistent volume claims. Do you really want to type those out during a short exam? No, that'll waste a lot of time. So you can shorten them. Not all of them have shortened variations. For instance, I believe stateful sets don't. Volume snapshots, I don't know. You won't have to do that one. I don't think in the exam. But namespaces do ns. So K get ns, and there are my namespaces. And look, I've got a Mongo and a Postgres namespace. So let's go into the Mongo one. I'm sorry. K get pod and Mongo. And I'll press tab, and that's my auto completion. See, I typed K get PO instead of pods. That's 2 letters cut down. Minus N instead of dash namespace. And then I just typed MON, press tab, and that huge long namespace auto completed. Saved me a lot of time. So there are my pods in there. Another big pod. So let's describe this again. Let's say there's a problem with this pod, okay? And one of the ways that you can troubleshoot problems in pods, is to describe them. Describe anything for that matter. You can describe any component or any object in Kubernetes. So let's do a K describe. I don't think there's a short form of that. And I'll do it PO for pods, and then namespace will be Mongo. Again, tab. And I'll start again and do tab, and look, that very long pod name, okay, which you get sometimes in deployments that create really long pod names, it auto-completed, saving a lot of time. I press that, and in the scribe you get a lot of information. Okay, so those are really important time savers. Now, in your lab, you won't have that when you set it up. So there's something called the Kubernetes cheat sheet, the kubectl cheat sheet. It's not a cheat sheet because it's come from the Linux Foundation itself, or from the Kubernetes organization, I'm sorry. The kubectl cheat sheet is kind of like being silly there, but it has the first part of that. It has a lot of things in there which are interesting. In fact, this kubectl cheat sheet on the official Kubernetes documentation is one page you want to remember. It has a lot of important information. First important information has autocomplete information, okay? So it has, depending on the shell you're using, most people are using bash, but you might be using Z shell, but there it is. These are the things that you need to do to have an alias and autocomplete, what I just showed you. So you do that in your lab and it all runs. If you go down further down, it has all sorts of information and examples of commands, okay? So also very important to look at, all right? Oops, let me just pull that out of the way. So yeah, very important to look at this page, the kubectl cheat sheet on the Kubernetes documentation page. You are allowed to look at this, okay? But I would go through it a lot of times. I would practice, just go in and do these things for the fun of it. The more you do it, the more you'll remember where things are. And during the exam, if you have a sudden moment where your brain freezes, I've had it happen where something which should be pretty simple is just not coming through. You can quickly go to the place in documentation, especially if you've used it a lot, you'll find it, and it'll come back to you. That happened to me a number of times. So remember, the Kube CTL cheat sheet on the Kubernetes webpage. Okay, so that's going to be it for today. It's our quick little session, our little bite, our sound bite about Kubernetes. Remember auto-completion. Remember the Kubernetes documentation. Remember where things are. Next week, we'll be back, and we're going to probably do a bit more browsing of the Kubernetes documentation. See you next week.